So, it's been almost a year since Civilization 7 has released, and as many of you know, I was rather skeptical of Civilization 7 months before it was actually released. And personally, I mostly stayed away from the game since March. I haven't replayed seriously since then. So in this video, I wanted to reassess and take a look at everything that has happened in Civilization 7 since March 2025. And I did my best to be open-minded about it, but I do want to focus on whether the core problems were addressed or not. And I also looked at the overall community sentiment at various points after the major updates were released. So one of the biggest criticisms of Civilization 7, even before it was released, but especially after, was that the age system fundamentally disrupts Civilization's DNA, so to speak. And once people actually started playing Civilization 7 after it was released, a lot of players criticized the system and especially the transitions for being really clunky, and the ages feeling very disconnected from each other. It was almost like playing a campaign that consisted of 3 different scenarios. And you get to keep some of the stuff you did, but not all of it. So did 10 months of patches fix this? So first, let's start from the early days after release. So March, April and May. There was the 1.2.0 update, which added multiplayer teams functionality, food and growth system rework, new resources with unique effects, randomized resource generation, just one more turn endless mode and a few other things. There were also some very basic UI improvements. And this update definitely created the sense among many people that the game launched very much incomplete, which was already something that was discussed a lot even before this point. And many other critical features of previous Civilization games remained absent from Civilization 7 at this point in time. Some of them would be added, but only later. And this brings us to June. June was definitely one of the biggest updates, especially at that point, but even overall. It added large and huge map sizes. So again, that's one of those things that previous Civilization games always had, but Civilization 7 launched without them. It added Steam Workshop support, which, needless to say, was one of the most requested features since day one, and obviously a major community win. It also added advanced game options, with things like the ability to disable specific legacy paths, bypassing save unlock requirements, so you could pick any save regardless of your progression, customizing AI difficulty per opponent, adjusting independent power hostility, and some others. It also added town specialization system, which was a major change which affected the game's meta quite a bit. It added new city-state bonuses and religious beliefs, and some other things. The overall community reaction at the time was appreciated, but a lot of people felt like this is not really enough. And this update, despite being big, did not really move the needle on the overall sentiment. And the Civilization 7 kept hovering around the 50% user reviews, which it does to this day. The concurrent player numbers have also severely deteriorated at that point, and this update didn't really affect them in a major way. And this brings us to July. So in July, there was an update that attempted to tackle one of the elephants in the room by adding the continuity mode. So in continuity mode, your units stay where they were in the previous age, and they are upgraded to their new version for that age. Settlers, scouts, merchants, and ships also now carry over. And there was a 10-turn countdown added as a warning before the age transition. And furthermore, all existing buildings are preserved when the transition happens. They retain their base yields but lost their adjacency bonuses. And the community reaction at the time was mixed, to say the least. A lot of people thought that Firaxis felt forced to add this mode. A lot also felt that this is a band-aid rather than a fix. And the community was very much split on whether this helps or hurts the game. There were people who left strictly due to clunky age transitions who considered returning, but many also felt that continuity mode was either too easy or it just straight up undermined Civilization 7's core design. Because the ages and the way they work, whether you like them or not, are the core of Civilization 7's design. So in the end, this change was not really enough to bring back people who left because of how Civ 7 is designed, but for people who stayed because they either liked the way Civilization 7 is designed or they didn't mind, this was not really a positive change. So overall, the sentiment was very much mixed about this. So this brings us to August and September 2025. There were further balance changes to continuity mode. There was also a collapse mode announced, with harsher age transitions for people who wanted more challenge. There was also a Napoleon rework, new themed city-states, but most importantly, there was the Right to Roll DLC, with some new leaders and nations. And a lot of people did appreciate the incremental improvements, but the overall core sentiment remained largely unchanged. Then in October, there was the big announcement Firaxis dropped, which was that they are testing the option to play as one single civilization from start to finish, and they said this was one of the most requested features. And this was a controversial announcement, to say the least. A lot of people who left Civilization 7 really celebrated that it's finally getting back to Civilization roots. On the other hand, most people who stayed argued that it messes with the core identity of Civilization 7, and that Firaxis should instead focus on fixing existing features, like religion, government, or crisis. Then, a little bit later, in November and December 2025, Firaxis released the Tides of Power collection, which was free to claim until January the 5th, 2026. It added new leaders and new nations. 1.3.1 update also added the Shattered Seas map type and the biome improvements. And again, the overall community reaction was positive towards the free content and the changes, although many people did point out that it's basically window dressing on fundamental issues that still remained. Today, if we look at concurrent player numbers on Steam, the picture is pretty grim. Civilization 7 is sitting just below 10,000 average concurrent players, with the daily peaks around 11,000-12,000 on the weekends usually. Meanwhile, Civilization 6 is sitting around 40,000 average concurrent players, and Civilization 5 is sitting just above 15,000. Civ 7 did bounce a little bit between September and December 2025. However, none of this really moved the needle on the user reviews, which are still sitting at 48%. They have been sitting around 50% basically this entire time. And my personal assessment and opinion is that all of this is basically a result of Firaxis taking a very large gamble on the Civilization 7's design, quite possibly the biggest gamble they have ever taken on a new mainline Civilization game. And so far, it did not pay out as well as they would have liked. The game continuity debate still continues and will likely continue. One could definitely argue that the age system cannot be fixed, because the age system is the game. It's fundamental to Civilization 7. You cannot fix it, because the whole game is designed around it. You could also argue that adding continuity mode and single civilization options are admissions of failure to some extent, and an attempt to bring back all those people who have bounced off Civilization 7, which again is in itself kind of an admission that Firaxis wants to bring those people back, and that they are not okay with them leaving. Because if they were okay with them leaving, they would have doubled down on existing Civilization 7 design and continued to improve that existing design. And this is also, in my opinion, the core issue of the ongoing debate within the Civilization community, because obviously there is a large group of people who enjoy Civilization 7 for what it is. And they feel like Firaxis should continue to improve on existing design, make the existing game better, not try to rewrite it in an attempt to make players who already left happy. because the players who already left might not even come back to begin with, while people who are here already enjoy the game and will likely buy future DLCs. So in my view, both sides have perfectly valid points, and this is a very tough situation for Firaxis to be in. Personally, I do actually agree with everyone who says that these core systems cannot be fixed in the sense that people who left want them fixed, because they are the game. You cannot fix them without literally remaking the game from ground up. At that point, you might as well just make an entirely new Civ game. So, in that sense, that ship has already sailed. And it might be an exercise in futility to bring back people who really dislike Civilization 7's design. So, to sum up all of this, should you return to Civilization 7? You might ask. Well, here's my assessment. If you bounced off Civilization 7 because of age transitions, if you bounced off Civilization 7 because of either lack of features or the UI problems or both, many were actually added in the updates over the past 10 months, although there are still major gaps. However, said gaps are significantly smaller than they were back in March 2025. So if you don't mind the core systems of Civilization 7, and this is a very big if, and your main complaint was the lack of features or lack of UI clarity, it might be worth taking a look again. Especially if you already own Civilization 7 to begin with, and you don't actually have to spend any money to take a look again. Just be aware that there are still very much many unaddressed gaps. If you bounced off Civilization 7 because more generically it was not Civ, quote unquote, then I would say that from that point of view it still isn't, and it might never be, because it's fundamentally quite a different game compared to previous Civilizations. The core systems of Civilization 7 do things that no other Civilization game has done up until this point for the past 30 years. So if that was your core complaint, then this is something that will likely not change. With all that said, some of the things that I mentioned here in this video are still in testing phase. Most notably the single Civilization playthrough. You cannot do that as of right now, that is still being tested, as well as the collapse mode, which makes age transitions even harsher. Those two things are still being tested. Now, there's another elephant in the room that I haven't mentioned yet. Future major expansions. Will they quote-unquote save Civilization 7? At least for those of you who think it needs saving. So obviously, history suggests that there's a good chance of that happening, because that's what happened with Civ 6, it's what happened with Civ 5, and it even happened with Civ 4. It's basically a meme within the Civ community, that Civilization games are only really good after 2 expansions. So that might obviously happen, there is a chance that it will happen. It will depend, obviously, on what said expansions will actually do. One could certainly argue that the foundation is shaky, but with 2 major expansions, well, it's not impossible to turn Civilization 7 into a great game that the majority will enjoy. I do think it's entirely fair to say that the core design is the most divisive issue within the Civilization community, and you cannot just patch that away. That's why, at least in my view, the updates will not fix the core problems. So that's why, at least in my view, the updates will not really change things in a fundamental way. We need major expansions in order for that to potentially happen. Either way, my recommendation is that it might be best to wait for a single Civilization mode and see how exactly that's handled. If you like more traditional Civilization gameplay, it might be best to just stick with Civ 6, Civ 5 or Civ 4, whichever one you enjoy the most. Or if you're able to do that, you can also consider Civilization 7 to just be a different game entirely, and not treat it as part of the Civilization franchise. I will say that I do appreciate Firaxis' responsiveness and their attempts to fix things, although at the same time, responsiveness is not the same as fixing the fundamental design issues. So for a bit of a weird analogy, if you build a building, an apartment block, and people move into it, and it turns out you just built a fundamentally wrong building, You cannot easily fix that problem without demolishing most of it and rebuilding it from scratch, no matter how much you listen to people who moved in. At the same time, there are plenty of people who are happy with Civilization 7's core systems. And they had an entirely legit argument that Firaxis should not try as hard to bring back people who didn't like the game to begin with, and focus on people who do. And I do actually kind of agree with that argument, and I say that as someone who bounced off Civilization 7. But also, all of this is part of a bigger trend. According to Steam's own data, only 14% of playtime spent by all Steam users was spent on new releases in 2025, which obviously includes Civilization 7. And a big part of that is the price. Either way, let me know what your experiences are with Civilization 7 and what your opinions are. How do you feel about all of the updates that the game had so far? Let me know in the comments below. And thanks for listening to this video, I appreciate it. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.